like it's crazy. Every time I'm back in New York, it's like we pay a lot of taxes. Property taxes are also very high. And then you're driving on the road and there's potholes everywhere and you're like, how is this possible? You know, like, yeah, sometimes it doesn't make sense. It makes you wonder, like, where's all the money going? Yeah, you know, at least here you feel it, so you feel better about it.
I think so too.
You're listening to Foreigners in Finland, a podcast that explores the experiences of people who moved here from abroad. My name is Felipe Silva. I'm originally from New York, and I'm accompanied by my co-host Jarrod Luxton from Melbourne, Australia. We talk about why people come here, some challenges foreigners face, and all the incredible things this country has to offer. We hope our discussions help anyone new to Finland get accustomed to life here and bring new perspective to Finns.
Welcome back, everyone, to Foreigners in Finland. Today we have a pretty exciting episode, I would think, for most foreigners. It's work life in Finland. So if you are here studying and you're looking to one day secure a job, this episode is definitely for you. So the point of it is just to give the listener an idea of what to expect in a job here in Finland. What's a working culture? What are some of the norms of working culture? And maybe also to give some Finns an idea of what can be seen as maybe foreign, a bit strange. So then you can really spend some time introducing that foreigner to those work-life norms.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great, and it's important to have an idea of these things when you start working as a foreigner, because it's going to help you integrate in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's the whole idea.
Yeah, and I guess we can start then with the first our first thought here, which is that work life is quite balanced here in Finland, and there's quite a few components to this. But I think we can maybe start by just explaining that a normal full-time workload is 37.5 hours. That's what you would be expected to work within a full-time job. And in general, I think Finns try to stick to that as much as possible. So there is quite an understanding of balance in terms of working hours. Of course, this depends on the workplace, but I would say in general, the understanding of work-life balance is maybe better here in Finland than it is back in Australia.
Yeah, definitely. And you can kind of tell by the holiday time as well, that here it's quite normal to, after 1 year of work, you have 4 or 5 weeks of holiday, and then eventually you get to a point where you have 6 weeks. And I would say that's very rare anywhere else in the world. So
in comparison, I mean, Australia has usually four weeks.
Okay.
That would be normal, but there's not usually an ability to grow that. So it's sort of 4 weeks, and that's kind of...
And that's it.
And that's it. And,
Okay.
and the States is significantly less.
In the States, they say it's usually 2 weeks. I had an experience where I had 3 weeks starting out, but it usually doesn't go much over like 4 or 5. And you would have to be working for quite some time at the same company, you know? So you kind of have to like earn those days. They're not just given to you.
And I feel like here in Finland, quite a lot of those, like the nice parts of the work balance are actually protected in the sort of in the working agreements that are made by the unions and by the different organizations. So it's not something that you necessarily have to go in and argue for in your job interview or in the recruitment process, because it's a general standard. So
Right.
you don't have to go and try and fight for 5 weeks of time off. It's generally an understanding. Of course, it might vary on job to job, but that's the general standard here in Finland.
And there's usually like a time where you're expected to take holiday, you know, and you're supposed to use your holiday. Like you'll actually be forced to use your holiday.
Yeah. And that's in July, which is interesting because quite a lot of the industries and the offices actually go into very reduced mode during July here in Finland, because everyone's taking their holiday leave most of the time.
Right. And I think another aspect that makes it quite, I don't know if balance is the right word, but a bit like easier, is that you usually have flexible hours. So, okay, you might start at 8, you might start at 9, but as long as you put your hours in, and that seems to me, from my understanding, quite like industry standard. Of course, it depends on what kind of position you hold. You know, if you're working at the store and opening hours is at 9, then you got to be there at 9. But maybe if you're doing some consulting work, you know, as long as you're getting your assignments done, or if you have a meeting, of course. But the flexibility seems to be there.
Yeah, I think probably the pandemic has had a big impact on this one. obviously with people working from home and maybe working some different kind of hours because of that. I think in Australia also since the pandemic, quite a lot of bosses and companies have had a more open perspective towards flexible hours, and rather than requiring people to be in the office from a certain period of time.
Yeah.
But I think it definitely pervades quite a lot of Finnish job market as far as I can see.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing which I could bring up too is the work time here in Finland. So the time that you're kind of actually expected to be working under a normal structure. It's generally a bit earlier actually than back in Australia. So I guess I would say the normal working hours here in Finland are from 8 till 4. That's what I would consider like generally normal. Obviously a bit of movement there. In Australia, the standard is definitely 9 to 5. Also with a bit of movement in either direction. So I think that's something that foreigners could also take some getting used to, is that quite a lot of the office or the desks will start to fill up from 8 o'clock rather than from 9 o'clock. One other point that I can make about the holidays, which is really nice here in Finland, and it was something that new for me when I came here, is the idea of lomaraha, which in English that translates to like holiday money. So it's effectively a bonus that you get paid while you're on your holiday. I think it's historically it was meant so that workers could go and actually enjoy their holidays with a bit of extra money. That stuck around. So now here in Finland, you actually get most positions, or at least quite a lot of positions, receive a payment during the holidays. And the nice thing is that you can actually quite often change that for more time off. So instead of taking the payment of money, you can actually translate that into, okay, no, I want 2 more weeks of time off. And that's
quite
super
a nice
flexible
benefit.
and very, very nice. So I'm not sure if that's available for all positions, but at least it is a concept here in Finland that I had never heard of back in Australia.
Yeah, that was also very, very new to me as well, and a very nice surprise.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about a little bit of what expectations are at the office. So Finns traditionally are very prompt, and they're very punctual. So you're expected to be on time in like social settings, but also definitely in work settings. So if you have a meeting, you definitely don't want to be late. You want to show up maybe 5 minutes before or right on time.
Very, very punctual. I would echo that completely. I think if you are late, you better have a reason.
Right.
I think in general, Finns really value punctuality. For me, that really fit well because I also really value punctuality. There's a bit of an interesting attitude, I would say, in Australia. A bit less so in the professional side, but definitely on the social side. That if you're within about 10 minutes of the time which you said you were going to be, you're on time.
Yeah.
In Finland, you are definitely late.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
One other point we could touch on in terms of the work-life balance aspect is the emphasis on parental leave. So here in Finland, there's a massive emphasis on giving parents the ability to take time off from work and also help to secure their position while they're away. So the way the system works is that there's leave available for both parents, and that those parents can kind of decide how they want to split the leave, and then their positions are actually held for them. So that I don't think that the employer is allowed to like fire them or like or just replace them.
Yeah.
Of course, you can get someone in temporarily to cover them, and that's quite often how younger people can get some work experience through the parental leave cover. But I believe there's some obligation where the employer has to hold that position open for you while you're on parental leave, and that's definitely quite different to how it works back in Australia.
Very, very, very different from the United States as well.
Yeah,
I think that's a wonderful aspect, because if we're talking about having different priorities in life, it's like, of course, people want to take their work life very seriously, but then you don't want to sacrifice being a parent for work either. Or maybe some people do, but there are many people who really prioritize family and like having children. So that's a really nice aspect of bringing this work-life balance.
Yeah, it shows the emphasis on balance, because I'm sure it's quite expensive.
Yeah,
It's not.
sure.
It's definitely probably not very efficient for businesses. It's probably quite expensive for the government, who I believe supports the salaries, helps us to support the salaries during this parental leave. But it shows the sort of commitment that I think Finland has in general to trying to make work not just or it shows the commitment that Finland has to make life more about just work. It's also got the family benefits and the balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, maybe we can move into a little bit of social aspects at work. I think one important thing to shine some light on is that men and equal, men and women are seen as very much equal here, and that definitely adds a healthy dynamic at work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of the interactions, back in Australia, some of the workplaces that I had not experienced personally, because I think quite like most of the workplaces that I had been quite gender neutral. But in general, I think that there is potential back in Australia to have maybe more of a blokey kind of culture, kind of a bro culture that can maybe be a bit more hostile for females, especially in traditionally male-dominated industries. Like, I mean, I'm an engineer, and in Australia, that's more traditionally heavily male. Not now, it's changing, but traditionally. But here in Finland, I would say that does not exist at all. Of course, it depends on the industry, and I'm sure there are pockets of that do exist. But my experience has been it's very neutral, and I would say for females who want to sort of move into different professions and be able to sort of do what they want to do freely, I would say Finland is a really nice destination for that.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I haven't obviously I'm a male, but I haven't experienced any kind of barriers that I would see for females in the workplace, or at least they're very low compared to other places.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And maybe what are some other things that you've kind of experienced socially in the workplace, Jarrod?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind socially is lunch.
Yeah.
Lunch is super social.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Here in Finland. Back in Australia, I was lucky enough to be in a small company where we did actually eat lunch together most of the time, and it was also quite social. We had a funny tradition where our boss would always get the newspaper, and in the newspaper there was a small quiz, like kind of a general knowledge quiz. And when we were eating our lunch, we would kind of go through and try and do the general knowledge quiz. It was a fun tradition.
How big was the company? Or how
The
many people?
company was about 20 to 30 people.
Okay,
So it was small,
relatively small.
relatively small. The interesting thing here is that my experience here in Finland is even in bigger companies, the expectation is that you could eat lunch with your colleagues every day, and that's your chance to talk and socialize and hear a bit about what they're doing outside of work. Companies definitely make lunch enjoyable because they give you also extra benefits, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. So there's definitely a lunch benefit for most jobs, where the company might pay like 20% of your lunch, which is definitely a nice benefit to have and an incentive to use it, because basically just like getting some more money and an opportunity, like you said, to get to know your colleagues a bit better.
And I think one of the reasons that me and you have been skipping breakfast also, apart from the early lunch, is that the lunches here are very substantial. So my experience being that there's plenty of lunch canteens, these restaurants that are sort of set up. They know that people have the lunch benefits in their jobs, and they'll know that you can spend a certain amount. So like the lunch buffet, as it's called, is sort of set to usually align with the cost of what your lunch benefit may be. But these canteens are great. They have usually a salad bar. They'll have a few different hot food options. We've spoken about how nice the student lunches were in a previous episode.
Right.
It carries on into work life.
And they're a bit better.
They're more expensive.
They're more expensive.
Definitely, they aren't as cheap, but the quality it varies from place to place. But in general, it's quite high.
Yeah.
So you get a very nice hot meal, bread. You get a drink. You get salad. The whole shebang. Compared to back in Australia, where generally for lunch I was going to a sandwich place. I was just grabbing a sandwich, not necessarily the healthiest. Maybe I was grabbing some noodles from a noodle box place. That's very different. I think the nutrition that you get at lunch at work is like awesome here in Finland.
And that's not to say that every company has that type of setup, but it is very common, especially for bigger companies, to have. But even smaller companies, or maybe companies that are more central and don't have as big of a space to have a canteen in their office, they definitely still have that lunch benefit. And then it's very common for workers to like either order lunch to the office and eat with their colleagues, or go somewhere to like a restaurant and eat together.
Did you have any sort of habits when you were working in New York that it was your standard lunch, sort of compared to your time here in Finland?
Yeah, in New York, it was basically like everyone took their lunch whenever suited them best, like for their schedule that day.
Mm.
And many people would eat lunch like right at their desk, or then they would maybe go to a sandwich spot, like down the street and
Mm.
like eat there for a little bit. But it was never really that people would eat together,
Mm.
you know.
Mm.
We would definitely hang out after work,
Mm.
um, but yeah, during the day, lunch was not really a thing.
And I think that's quite similar in certain workplaces in Australia too. But I must say, I love the social side of lunch because
Yeah.
that's your time that you get to speak with your colleagues. I suppose the other time would also be coffee breaks, and Finns take quite a lot of coffee breaks. We've touched on this before. Finns drink quite a lot of coffee, and coffee breaks are definitely an important part of the workday in Finland. But that's also a chance to get social with your colleagues here in Finland.
Yeah, it's quite common to take a coffee break at least once a day, maybe even sometimes twice a day, because the Finns really do love their coffee.
I would say a morning and an afternoon coffee break would be, if not standard, but generally accepted.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to connect with someone at work, my experience would be suggest to go grab a coffee with them at a coffee break. I think that's a generally well accepted sort of thing that you can go and grab a coffee, maybe have a couple of biscuits. Quite a lot of the offices have spaces where they're specifically made to go and have a coffee together. So that would be a good piece of advice from me if you're trying to build some social network at work.
Yeah, another opportunity to get to know your colleagues, for sure. I would also mention that it's not very hierarchical. Like we touched on this in the episode of university life in Finland, and I think that also carries into work life. So sure, we all have different positions in a company, but it's quite easy to talk to someone who's like maybe a manager or head of a department, and it's not like there's a barrier or you have to feel shy about asking questions or taking some of their time. I would say that it's quite easy to just talk to anybody.
Yeah, I would say so too. My experience being that I wouldn't have felt awkward asking my professor at university to come and grab lunch, like if we had some sort of friendship. And in the same way, I wouldn't feel awkward asking like a boss or some higher manager to do the same.
Yeah.
And for the Finns listening, it can actually be a bit intimidating, like back in Australia or I suppose also in the US, because maybe if you're in a place that does have a bit more hierarchy, there is some sort of barrier there because you're generally, I think, spending time with kind of your level of people, like people that have or like your level of colleagues, people that have maybe the same sort of title or position as you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It can be maybe a bit difficult to socially break up into the other parts of the company. But here in Finland, my experience being everyone eats generally together and there's much less of that hierarchy.
Right. Yeah.
One other thing that I could mention too that's interesting about here in Finland is that there's quite an emphasis on like hobby groups in companies. So if you want to be social, and we spoke about this previously before, hobbies are a great way to meet people here in Finland. This also translates into work. So my experience being that generally they can be a bit hard to find sometimes. They're not always well advertised, I would say, but generally those groups of people that share a hobby in a workplace, they can quite often organize, maybe with some support from the company to sort of sponsor their meetups or some drinks or something while you're doing something together. And that can be a really nice way for, I think, foreigners to network a bit inside of a company here in Finland. If you like rock climbing or you like, doing some sort of activity, ask around and find if there's a group of people that might be doing that on a Thursday or a Friday night after work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think many times these companies also offer some type of hobby activity that's already paid for and scheduled in. So they might have a tennis time slot once a week or twice a week that their employees can use. Maybe the slots are taken up, or it might be tough to get a slot like every week. Maybe you have to get one every 3 weeks or once a month. But I believe that they do exist quite a lot.
Yeah, and I
that's
think
another great way to, do something active with your colleague, or to even meet a new colleague that in another department in the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this also comes back to the element of balance. I think Finnish employers in general have quite a good understanding of trying to improve and maintain the health of their employees, both mental health, but let's also say physical health here too.
Yeah.
And through encouraging these types of physical hobbies like sports and things, I think that's a really nice way that there's an emphasis not just on the output of work, but also
Yeah.
trying to make work like sustainable over the long run so you don't get burnt
For
out.
sure, for sure. And one thing that I noticed right away is like, I'm going to ask you a question. Did you have a stand-up desk at your old job in Australia?
I had to argue for one.
Yeah, I did the same. I like asked, I don't know if I argued, but like I just asked for one because I saw some people like downstairs on the first floor had, and I was like, that would be really convenient and
Yeah.
like ergonomical.
Mm.
And I'm just like, okay, I want that. You
Yeah,
know?
but you're definitely right. Here in Finland, there's a much higher emphasis on those ergonomics. You're not
Yeah.
expected to spend your days hunched over in a bad position on a certain desk. They have almost, I think, quite a lot of workplaces have standing desks as a standard.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say is like from my understanding, I could be wrong, but I think that most places here in Finland do have that like standing desk option,
Mm.
or like it's the automatic standing desk. You know,
Mm.
like you can adjust the height and you can sit or stand or you know.
And I
It's
think
quite great.
this comes back to a core point that I think Finnish employers generally try to take care of their employees rather than the attitude of trying to extract value from them. We've been talking quite a lot about like desk jobs because I guess that's been our experience. But I also know that Finland is quite well known for prioritizing like work site safety. So, for instance, people that are doing physical jobs, maybe outside working with tools and machinery, there's a very strict focus on like minimizing accidents, minimizing sort of problems and potential issues on the work sites.
Yeah.
So I think that's also something that would be good for foreigners to know. Is that in general, I think working in Finland, the companies make an effort to take care of you, whether it's through safety, whether it's through ergonomics, or just work-life balance in general.
Yeah, they want to make sure that you don't get burnt out and that you know you're happy doing what you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they kind of have the philosophy that if the employee is happy doing what they're doing, they're going to be able to have a better output in the long run. You know, it might not be like in the first year or two, but like over a long time span of 10 years, you know, the output is going to be much more net positive than
Yeah,
if they're just trying to extract everything out
exactly.
of their
It's
employee.
I think employees are maybe viewed with a more long-term focus, less than trying to say what can we get out of this person for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
It's more if we make this a nice place to work, this person's going to be putting in hard work for us for 10 years plus. So I totally feel that.
Right.
Hey, what about salaries and taxes? That's always interesting to talk about
Yeah, sure is.
with work. What's been your experience?
I feel that most people definitely want to like know what the scoop is, and I think the general idea is that taxes in Finland are really high, but I definitely wanted to make a point that I don't think they're relatively that much higher than the United States, for example, up to a certain level. I think that in Finland, it's a very progressive tax system. So if you're making, you know, like under 60, 70,000 a year, you know, your taxes are relatively the same. It's like once you start making over 80, 90, 100,000 a year, and then of course, if you're making like 200,000 a year, your taxes are going to be much, much higher than the States. But I would argue that that system makes sense. You know, it's like, and those taxes go to something here, you know, like
You feel the tangible
you
benefits.
feel those benefits and like it's very noticeable, you know, like you can see it in the school system, you can see it in the work benefits that people have, you can see it in the welfare system, so you can see it in the transportation, everything just seems to work here, and a lot of and a lot of the reason for that is because of these taxes, you know, and how efficient the government is with using those taxes. So I would say that taxes are relatively the same to the United States up to a certain point.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. Australia also has a reasonably progressive taxation system, but not maybe as progressive as here in Finland, and the results are much the same. So I think in terms of tax, I'm paying about the same actually as I was back in Australia, which might surprise quite a lot of Finnish people. I think generally the salaries are a bit higher back in Australia.
Yeah, same in the States, I would say.
But in terms of taxation, it's about the same. And I would echo you again in saying that I definitely notice the benefits of paying taxes, and I feel better paying taxes here in Finland because it's more obvious to me where the benefits are. It seems to be somehow more transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we've also experienced many of those benefits. Like, you can't have the lunches that we've had at university without some kind of assistance from the government. You know, like the restaurants would not be making like enough money to sustain their
They
business.
need to be supported by the taxes, don't
exactly,
they?
yeah, because we were paying like €2.70, you know, for like a full meal. So, but how much easier did that make our lives, like as students, to study and to focus on what was really important at that moment, which was to study and socialize and have a good university experience.
Yeah, it's totally worth it in my eyes. As a person who's now paying taxes into the Finnish system, I'm happy to pay,
right,
because you see the benefits more. I think that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and then like it's crazy every time I'm back in New York. It's like we pay a lot of taxes. The property taxes are also very high. And then you're driving on the road and there's potholes everywhere and you're like, how is this possible? You know, like yeah, sometimes it doesn't make sense. It makes you wonder, like, where's all the money going? Yeah, you know. At least here you feel it, so you feel better about it.
I think so too. A couple of other points maybe that we can bring up here. I think in general, like, salaries aren't discussed very much here, like between like colleagues or like at work. I think people here in the workplaces in Finland maybe don't like to talk about money.
Quite of a taboo, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. In Australia, I think the attitude is people don't like talking about money, but quite often it comes up.
Yeah.
Much more so than here in Finland. So for foreigners coming here, I would say you could maybe expect that people aren't going to disclose their salary. They don't want to talk about money.
Right.
It can be a slight taboo, I think, here in Finland.
Yeah. I would just make the point that I think it's usually in the employee's benefit to discuss like salaries, because at least then it's very transparent on like, okay, who's getting paid what based off how much work they're doing, and is it like a fair well, of course, fair is
it's
subjective. It's relative, you know, on who's thinking about it. But, you know, if you're thinking that you're being underpaid and you feel like you're doing the same amount of work as someone else, then it's a like an opportunity for you to think, okay, like, why is that person getting a bit more salary, and then like, do I need to be doing something to get there? Or you can kind of have that discussion with your employer, and it just kind of, I think, makes it like an even playing field, you know?
And I would say also that one more thing that was new for me is that the salaries are generally more standardized here. So there's less like variance. In Australia, when you go and negotiate a salary, it's kind of fair game. Like, through your discussions and through your negotiations, you can effectively ask for anything that you want. But here in Finland, there seems to be much more structure around experience, the salary associated with those many years of experience, and then also the unions have different types of agreements that have been pre-negotiated according to your sector, your level, and these different things. So I would say if someone's moving here to Finland, make sure you try and understand all these different components, because it is important when you start to have a discussion with your boss, so you know, what can I ask for, where can I sort of try and maybe ask for some sort of raise, what's appropriate, what's already been negotiated for me.
Right. Not so much flexibility, basically.
I would say less flexibility, but more structure. And depending on your personality type, that could be good or bad.
Right. Yeah. The one thing I wanted to mention is that, like, I think that the personality of Finns, in our previous episode, we talked about that maybe Finns aren't usually the ones to initiate a conversation or initiate, you know, like greeting someone. I think that also carries over into the work life. Of course, every single job environment is different, but don't be surprised if, you know, you're walking down the hall and you're in a big company and someone who's not in your department doesn't say hello. You know, it's more kind of like, okay, they're just doing their thing. They're going about their work day, and maybe they don't feel like having small talk, or it's not part of the culture really.
Mm.
You know,
I would definitely echo that small talk is significantly reduced compared to Australia. And maybe we can flip this around for our Finnish listeners. If you're going to work in Australia, in the US, be prepared that people are going to small talk to you all day long.
Yeah.
So if you bump into someone at the coffee machine or something, they're going to talk to you for maybe 1 or 2 minutes. There might not be the most important information considered in that conversation, but it's just trying to be pleasant.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say I'd turn that around. And for our Finnish listeners, if you're going to get the experience to work abroad, prepare those small talk skills.
You will be greeted. You know? You will be acknowledged and like have some kind of small, short conversation, like you said. Yeah.
Remember, you can always talk about the weather, even outside of Finland.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess that's just such a basic conversation, but it works.
Yeah.
You know. So I think that's about it for this episode. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, from my side, working in Finland, I think the Finns have got a lot right with maintaining a really healthy work-life balance. That's kind of the point that I really want to underscore this show with. The work-life balance here in Finland is a priority. And I think if Australia could learn one thing from the Finns, it would be to really enshrine that work-life balance as a key component of your working life. So that's kind of what I'd like to end on.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with all that. And I think that, like you said, Finland just got a lot right. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you guys.
Later.